Welcome back. You're watching As It Happens. I'm still with Business Leadership South Africa's Chief Operating Officer, Busisiwe Mavuso, joining me in studio. So among the package of things that we perhaps want to sell to investors, potential investors, is the strength of our institutions, but also governance issues. There was a point where we were rated quite highly in this regard, but does a high ranking, and I'm not sure where we stand in terms of the rankings, I think we've actually may have dipped somewhat, but is it warranted that we should have a high ranking in governance given what we've seen in the last few months and years happening in corporate South Africa? So
the high ranking that we have is actually warranted, and yes, we do deserve it, although it has dipped. We deserve it, Thulasizwe, because we've got the structures in place, we've got the framework in place, we've got King 4, for instance, you know, that the JSE companies, even though it's only a recommendation, carry out, you know, as if it's law, as if it's policy. Now, those are the kind of things that investors normally look for when they look at an investment destination. And you have to agree with me that not a lot of countries in Africa actually have such structures and actually frameworks in place. We have actually a high ranking in South Africa because we have a judiciary system that works. And I think if we haven't proven ourselves, if the strength of our judiciary has not been tested in the past year or so, then I don't know, we cannot have a more tougher test. And I think the ranking that we have in that regard is definitely warranted because of, you know, our judiciary is alive and we definitely have strong structures in place. I mean, the reason why we didn't tank that much, for instance, in 2008 is precisely because of those framework and structures. And I think the international community absolutely appreciates that.
But people watching all of these developments in this country must be worried about a crucial part of running a business in any environment, yes. Accounting practices and the auditing practices. I mean, Steinhoff, today was the AGM that took place, and I'm hearing that people are actually disappointed even from that they're not getting a clearer picture of what these so-called accounting irregularities exactly were. Even the shareholders are none the wiser.
Yeah, accounting irregularities, fraud and corruption, we have to call it what it is actually. So I absolutely agree with you. But I think the beauty when it comes to South Africa and as far as this matters is concerned is that we take ownership as South Africans, we take action. And more often than not, we actually beat ourselves up about these things as South Africans. We don't try to sweep them under the carpet. When you find instances of corruption in the private sector, you know heads roll. You see people resigning. Is it enough? No. Actually, I think we should be taking it a step further. Those that are CA and that have been found, you know, having affected unethical conduct, I think they should be struck off the roll. And I think that is where we need to take it a step further. So we are not different in terms of are these things actually not happening anywhere else in the world? Of course they're happening the whole world around. But the importance is that when they've now been unveiled, what therefore happens? And as South Africans, we take ownership, we take action, and we immediately say, what are the systems, what are the internal controls, you know, what are the measures that we're actually going to put in place to ensure that such doesn't happen again.
I hear your words of comfort about the systems existing and also the processes to take ownership of the problems. But let's go into the diagnosis a bit. A bit earlier this week, we saw the Auditor General terminate all work that the AG procures from KPMG and Nkonki Inc. In terms of auditing services. During that process, he makes a declaration, a statement that says the country's accounting and perhaps the auditing professions are, you know, in the gutter, as it were. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I don't agree with that sentiment. Does SAICA need to be worried? Yes, they are. Are they worried? Yes, they are. I think you and I will agree that over the past year, SAICA, Terence Nombembe have had a lot of conversations about what is happening to the audit profession. What are we missing? What more needs to be done? And I think that is the beauty of where South Africa thrives when it comes to this regard. So we take action, we take ownership, and we're actually actually running around chasing our tails, you know, to say that what are the measures that we actually need to put in place. I mean, there are talks around, do we need to actually be reviewing the curriculum? Do we need to actually be increasing, you know, the issues around ethics and the professionalism, you know, the oath that accountants take? Do we need actually to be, you know, affecting that? What more can we do? And I think that is the beauty of what you find in the South African context, you know, that we actually take action, we take ownership, and we immediately come to the party and say that we actually need to find ways. And action, again, Thulasizwe, action. We have found what has happened in as far as KPMG is concerned. Now, this says no organization in this country is too big to fail. KPMG is one of the big four, you know, and we all agree that South Africa will be poorer without KPMG, you know, because it just shrinks and it, you know, creates the oligopolies that we say we don't want, you know, it creates the concentration. But are we going to absolve KPMG, you know, because they are too big? No. So it says, and it gives a strong message to any institution, you know, any organization, that no organization is too big to fail and none of them are above the law. And it was a good message.
Speaking of that, what are your members as BLSA saying about this particular issue of the big four, the oligopolies that you talk about? The Treasury has been insisting that there should be a rotation of, you know, of audit firms to sort of encourage more diversity in that space, but also to deal with, you know, certain issues of proximity that may come up from time to time. As we speak, there's concern about, you know, Deloitte being reappointed as Steinhoff's auditors with an overwhelming mandate by the, you know, those in charge at Steinhoff. So
this issue actually definitely puts those conversations, you know, into a little bit of difficulty, because if you are going to be pushing for rotation, now you're going to have three big firms. So who do you rotate around? But then here's a silver lining. It gives us, therefore, an inclination as a South African society to say, to what extent are we actually going to create the next KPMG, to create the next, you know, SNG, to create the next big four, big five, big six? To what extent do we ensure that the middle-sized organizations, which are a lot, auditing firms, which are a lot, to what extent do we prompt them up to ensure that they actually become, you know, part of the big four, part of the big five? To what extent do we place pressure on the top three auditing firms at the moment, if you want to include KPMG, top four, you know, to grow the actually middle-sized, you know, organizations? It now means that whenever the AG gives work to Deloitte, because there's only three of them, and because of the scope, because of the depth, because of the width, they will have no choice but to bring on board some of the SMME organizations. And what does it do to the SMME organizations? It actually gives them more scope, it gives them more width, and it allows them to actually grow. So we therefore need to have that conversation to say that, and I think we have said that concentration, you know, it cannot be, you know, we cannot live with these oligopolies. So how are we creating the next four, next big, the fourth big firm, the fifth big firm, and to what extent are we going to ensure that we effect transformation in as far as that is concerned? There is that opportunity.
As you and I speak now, we're on standby for Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, to speak to us from Mahikeng, where there's been this protest that have been taking place. You know, in part, of course, they are political. They have to do with the political leadership of the province, but also in part they are about the issues of that are neatly, you know, packed into service delivery. But some of those issues talk to the socio-economics of the country and the legacy issues that we're still dealing with.
Yes.
From observers watching from the outside, what is the message that they should be getting from South Africa in as far as dealing with those socio-economic challenges and also legacy issues? What will be the role expected of any new investor that wants to come into South Africa as a result of the current drive in helping us deal with some of these issues? So the message will be that democracy is definitely alive in South Africa, which is a good thing. It definitely says that we have an active population. We have a society that actually is worried about, you know, holding government to account. And we've got a society, and I actually don't want to seem as if I'm actually encouraging, you know, the element of thuggery that is happening in Mahikeng, but it says our democracy is alive. And these people that are going to come into the country, therefore, need to be alive to that. There is an element of transformation
question when you look into it, because at the bottom of all of this, it's the people of Mahikeng saying enough and no more, saying that we cannot continue living in the socio-economic, conditions while our, politicians are living in, different circumstances. So it says, they need to be accountable.